You know that feeling, right? That nagging sense that maybe, just maybe, your choices aren't entirely your own? Like there's some sort of invisible force guiding what you believe, what you value, and honestly, even who you are? Well, today in this explainer, we're going to be unraveling those hidden strings of society that quietly shape our everyday lives. We're diving deep into the groundbreaking and frankly kind of mind-bending theories of the French philosopher Louis Althusser. Okay, so here is the game plan. We aren't going to do a dry, boring lecture here. Instead, we're going on a dynamic, Socratic journey together by tackling 5 massive questions. We're going to look at who Althusser was, unpack what structural Marxism actually is, discover how society controls us without us even noticing, define a really fascinating concept called interpolation, and then finally, ask if art actually has the power to change any of this. But to really get into this, we actually need to take a quick step back and ask, what exactly caused the field of sociology to stop hyperfixating on individual people and start looking at these massive, invisible societal structures? So, question 1. Who is Louis Althusser and that big shift in sociology? To set the stage, think back to the 1950s and 60s. Thinkers were starting to shift gears. They were moving away from studying micro-level, everyday human behavior, and instead, they were zooming way out to look at entire societies. A major catalyst for this whole movement was the American sociologist C. Wright Mills. In his 1959 work, The Sociological Imagination, Mills basically urged people to start connecting their own personal individual struggles to these massive, invisible structural forces. And that questioning approach, it totally paved the way for our main subject today.
Enter Louis Althusser. He was a French philosopher who took this structural approach and just cranked it up to a whole new level. You see, at the time, Marxist thought was really dominated by humanism. That's the idea that humans are these creative agents completely shaping their own destiny. Well, Althusser completely rejected that. He was looking for what he called a scientific third way. He argued that if we want to truly understand society, we literally have to strip away that romanticized idea of the free-willed individual and instead look at the cold, hard mechanics of history.
And that brings us perfectly to our second big question, which is really the crux of this whole thing. If we aren't the free-willed individuals we think we are, then what exactly is structural Marxism? Question 2. What is structural Marxism? Or, as I like to call it, the puppet versus the puppet master. Let's dive right into the core of his theory. On one side, you've got humanist Marxism. Again, that tells us humans are creative beings consciously making their own history. But for Althusser and structural Marxism, that warm, fuzzy sense of free will and choice is largely just an illusion. Think of society like a giant puppet theater. We are the puppets, and the unseen structures of society are the puppet master, quietly and constantly dictating our thoughts, our actions, and our beliefs. Now, you might be thinking it's just one guy pulling the strings, right? Well, Althusser didn't think it was just a simple top-down control system. He borrowed this concept called overdetermination. Basically, society is a deeply tangled web. Classical theory used to argue that money and the economy just dictated absolutely everything. But Althusser said, actually, scratch that, it's not quite that simple. He broke society down into 3 levels: the economic, the political, and the ideological. And they all interact, they clash, and they overlap. There isn't just one simple cause for anything. The whole shebang is caught in this overdetermined, tangled web. Which leads us to a rather chilling third question. If society is this heavily structured puppet theater, how exactly does a capitalist society keep order without constantly resorting to violence and brute force? Question 3. How does society control us? The RSA versus the ISA. So, to explain how this control actually works, Althusser identified 2 distinct, parallel tools used by the state. First up is the repressive state apparatus, or the RSA. This is the stuff we usually picture: the police, armies, courts, prisons. They maintain order through physical coercion and violence. But that is not enough on its own. You can't just rely on force. So we also have the ideological state apparatus, or the ISA. These are seemingly private, everyday institutions. We're talking schools, the media, the church, and yes, even your family. The ISA doesn't use violence. Instead, it controls us through ideology and psychological manipulation. The absolute genius and the true power of the ISA is that it operates completely under the radar. It manipulates how we think right from the time we are children, instilling what's called a false consciousness. By doing this, the state largely sidesteps the need for physical oppression. I mean, think about it. Why on earth would you force someone to work at gunpoint when you can just use the education system and the media to convince them that working that job was their ultimate dream all along? The ISAs are incredibly effective precisely because they make us willing subjects. As Althusser put it, they make us work all by themselves. We happily embrace our societal roles, completely unaware that we're actually being controlled. So let's get a little personal for a second. Think about yourself. How did you actually get your own identity? Like, how did you become you? Question 4. What is interpolation? The society that literally calls your name. This brings us to what is arguably Althusser's most famous and definitely most intimate concept, interpolation. Now, it sounds like a heavy academic term, but it comes from a French word meaning to interrogate or to call out. Put simply, interpolation is the exact moment that structural web catches you. It's the process where ideology addresses you directly, turning you from just a biological human being into a social subject. It is literally society calling your name and telling you exactly who you are supposed to be. Let's walk through Althusser's famous everyday example to see how this works. Imagine you're just walking down the street minding your own business. Suddenly, a policeman shouts, "Hey, you there!" You instinctively turn around, right? Because you recognize that call is for you. In that split-second turn, Althusser says you have instantly become a subject of authority. You have subjected yourself to the law. And he says this happens everywhere, all the time. In school, in the media, at church. In fact, in a patriarchal society, he argued a baby is interpolated before it's even born, just by being assigned a father's last name. You are literally drafted into the ideology before you can even babble your first word. So, if we are all interpellated from birth, shaped by these ISAs and totally trapped in an overdetermined web of ideology, the million-dollar question is there any way out? Can anything break the illusion? Our fifth and final question. Can art actually change anything? Seeing the invisible strings. So, if we are trapped, is there an exception to the rule? Well, Althusser believed that art held a really unique power. As he pointed out in a letter, art doesn't just hand us strict scientific data. Instead, it uniquely allows us to see and feel the very ideology it was born out of. It's kind of like, think of good art like putting on a pair of specialized glasses. It takes the normal, everyday reality that we've been programmed to just blindly accept, and it makes it look weird or contradictory. Art makes the invisible strings of our societal puppet master suddenly visible to us. Which leaves us right here. If Althusser is right, if your identity, your deep-seated beliefs, your worldview, and literally your very name were handed to you by the ideological state apparatus before you even had the capacity to choose them, who are you, really? Are you actually the puppet master of your own life, or are you just a beautifully complex puppet navigating a stage built by someone else entirely? It is a pretty staggering thought, and I really hope this explainer has left you eager to pull at some of those invisible strings in your own life just to see what unravels. Keep questioning the structures around you.